Ladies and gentlemen, from a catacomb buried deep beneath the streets of the New World Order, this is the Remnant Underground. And now, here's your host, Michael J. Matt.
Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt, down in the catacombs. Yes, it is me again. I am among the living. It's been a while since we've checked in.
It's quite a while.
Quite a while. Here we are. We're still amongst the living, and there's just been a lot going on over at the Remnant lately. Mostly good, I guess. Poor old Francis, likely the worst pope in the history of popes. History of the papacy, right?
Just about.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. He pretty much has put practicing Catholics the world over into a full-scale panic at this point. And why not? I mean, really what's happening right now in the Catholic Church, ladies and gentlemen, is, and I don't need to tell anybody in this audience this fact, that this is truly monumental. What's happening in the Vatican right now is the biggest news story. Think about this for a moment. It's the biggest news story in history, at least since the incarnation of our Lord. This is it. There's nothing that I can think of in history that could possibly rival the apocalyptic development that the Catholic Church, founded by Jesus Christ, is leaving the field, is hoisting the white flag, is surrendering her colors to a diabolic new world order. That's what's happening right now. And to tell you the truth, I mean, you might disagree with me on this, but I'm really getting tired of the whistleblowing, that everyone is just, woohoo, I found another scandal, I got another thing I want to share, I'm going to make another video about... We get it. We got the t-shirt, we got the hat, we got it all. It's over. The corruption goes all the way to the top. And at the Remnant, you know, we've been reporting not only on this development for the past 50 years, this destruction of the Catholic Church, but on these characters themselves. Cardinal McCarrick, we've got something on our website right now from the Dallas meeting back in 2002. And who do you think was starring in that fiasco? Cardinal McCarrick.
We faced a real crisis of credibility with our people. We had no choice but to give it up. We must move forward. We must put an end to this.
And now, of course, we have the added wrinkle of Archbishop Vigano, who's proving what the rad trads were contending for 50 years, that the fish rots at the head. Surprise, surprise. It goes all the way to the top, just like the traditionalists have been saying all along. And I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about the pioneers, the guys 50 years ago who gave up everything to try to warn people that this day is coming. Well, here it is. Here it is. It's here. They've taken over the church, friends. They took it over a long time ago, and now it's becoming clear even to neo-Catholics. Thank God. I'm glad people are waking up. But these guys are out of the closet, and they have all the power still, and what we need to do now is get serious. We need to get back to the traditional Catholic basics. How did we get to this point? How did this happen? Because you know what? This isn't first and foremost about Pope Francis. Not really. He's just an effect. He's a cause of nothing. He's a little pawn in a big chair. And his reign of terror will come to an end soon enough. But that's not going to end this. Because the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that the Vatican has broken the covenant with Almighty God. And just for extra measure, they've also disobeyed his mother, Our Lady of Fatima, in refusing to comply with what she said could be done for a peace plan to save the church, to save. So they rejected that too. They wrecked the Roman Rite. They defied God. They defied his mother. And these things come with heavy divine consequences. And the enemy, now here's the other part of this that's so important. The enemy right now that is trying, you know, the George Soros, the far left, the evil in the world that is trying to destroy the Catholic Church, they must see that though we all want a clean house, we want to run the pervert and heretic interlopers out of our church, we're nevertheless going to stand and defend Mother Church against them. Mother Church herself, against those who want to exploit the sex scandal in order to destroy the church completely. Because as I say, the church is pure and inviolate. She is the spotless bride of Christ. And we will stay and we will fight for her. And at this point, not a lot of people are doing that. So it's absolutely essential that we traditional Catholics, especially, we've been at this for a half century, that we not lose our heads now, that we put strategy together that makes sense, and that we work to fight against those who, again, are trying to exploit this crisis in our church to destroy the church. And we must make it clear that we are not with them. We are not with those who are trying to destroy the church, that we are faithful Catholics, and that we feel the pain of betrayal and loss more than they can even imagine. They have no idea what it's like to be a faithful Catholic, to be going through the present crisis and the scandal and the horror and the rot in our own church. But this is why we're standing with the real church against the false church, against the great facade of modernism, against the failed Novus Ordo, against the lying church of accompaniment. We're not leaving the church. We're not going anywhere. We cannot make our resistance merely about Francis, for that matter, about Ted McCarrick, or about clerical sexual abuse, or even about homosexuality in the priesthood, all of which are only the residual effects, the collateral damage, if you will, of doctrinal and liturgical revolution at the heart and bosom of the Catholic Church for over 100 years. So I would say to our neo-Catholic friends, converts to tradition now who are coming over, please don't blame Francis for an evil menace that predates Francis by a century. I know it's easy to stand against this guy. It's easy to stand against Francis. He's not cool. He's not smooth. But the same certainly cannot be said of his predecessor, Pope John Paul II. And compared to resisting Pope John Paul the Great publicly, resisting Francis is a piece of cake. There's nothing to it. But the pioneer traditional Catholics did it. They stood up. They said the emperor is naked. He's going to freeze to death. The church is going to freeze to death. People don't wake up. So they took a lonely stand for tradition when nothing on earth was more unpopular than doing just that. Some of them were even excommunicated for it, you might remember. And yet, they were right. This is how far back it goes. John Paul, he was the one who protected Maciel. He was the one who made Cardinal Dan Yields a cardinal back in '93. He made Cardinal Mahoney a cardinal.
But you see that I have a superior, is Archbishop Mahoney. So,
Pope John Paul made him the cardinal. Pope John Paul made Ted McCarrick a cardinal. He made Jorge Bergoglio a cardinal back in 2001.
In 1992, John Paul II appointed him titular bishop of Auca. Then in 1997, he was appointed Archbishop of Buenos Aires and was made a cardinal in 2001. He is a member of the Pontifical Council for the Family and also of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America.
Pope John Paul excommunicated the one prelate in the church who had the faith and the courage to stand virtually alone against the very revolution that led to all the scandal and all the rot from which we're trying to protect our children today in 2018. He excommunicated Archbishop Lefebvre. So the hard reality, folks, I know you don't want to hear this. Everybody, John Paul, he was a watchdog of orthodoxy. Yeah. Compared to Francis, that's true. But it was another pope along the continuum to the point where we are now. And the hard reality is that without all these post-conciliar popes, there would never have been a Bergoglio. There would never have been a Pope Francis. He's part of them. They're part of him. And it was on their watch, the post-conciliar popes, it was on their watch when the marauders wrecked the Mass, smashed the statues in the sanctuaries, bulldozed the altars, knocked out the high altars completely, made the liturgical calendar utterly unrecognizable, green-lighted little things like meat on Fridays, remember that? What Catholic in the post-conciliar epoch abstains from eating meat on Friday? Now, they green-lighted. I would give you an option. Do something else. Be nice to people. Plant a tree, whatever. And then you don't have to give up meat on Friday. Well, look what happened. Now, nobody is abstaining on Friday. Nobody's making any sacrifices on Friday. Thank you very much, post-conciliar giants. These are the guys that edited the Bible. They kicked over the communion rails, right? They gutted the sanctuaries and the breviary. They turned sacred music over to John Denver, swapped organs for guitars, the whole bit. God help us. They're also the ones, not Francis, by the way, but they are the ones who went to places like Assisi and put the whole world on notice that the Catholic Church had reneged on her claim to be the only true church outside of which there is no salvation.
And another way of promoting the peace, which is not a result of negotiation, political compromises, or economic Vitesse, heresies.
And on our left. Ahora todos nos damos un signo de reconciliación y de paz según la tradición religiosa de cada uno, con nuestros vecinos que se encuentran a la derecha y a la izquierda.
ただいま平和と一致の印としてそれぞれの宗教の慣習に従って対応
Clearly, this didn't start with Francis. Bergoglio did not start the fire, and it's not going to end with him. So we got work to do. If you're already a traditional Catholic, join the effort, please, to unite the folks who are now just coming to realize that something terribly wrong has happened to the church. Let's put on our happy face. Let's welcome the people who are coming over and do what we can to kind of catch them up a little bit. You know, we're not going to agree on everything with these people. We're not going to agree with it. We got to realize that. We've all lived through 50 years of modernist indoctrination. So maybe one of these folks is going to show up at your traditional Latin Mass, ladies. A lady's going to show up wearing a pair of pants. Maybe she's going to have a shirt on that doesn't have sleeves. We don't have to excommunicate and anathematize her quite yet, right? We can wait on some of those things. They're new to the fight. Let's lovingly sort of show them the way back to holy tradition, back to Christ, back to the church. And if you're new to tradition completely, this is all brand new to you, maybe on YouTube you're hearing about it for the first time, please understand that there's a war going on. There's been a war going on for a long time, longer than most of us have been alive, and it's going to take you some time to grasp the full length and breadth of the revolution in the Catholic Church and the extent to which we've all been brainwashed. And we all need to have our eyes, the scales removed from our eyes to see really what's going on. And this is why I got to say, not to bring up another controversy, but I was really disappointed last week when someone sent me, I hesitate to get into this, but sent me a video from Church Militant TV where Michael Voris, a guy who I really did think was finally beginning to wake up to the true nature of the crisis, he came out once again swinging at the 1 million traditional Catholics in the Society of St. Pius X.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Vortex, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed. I'm Michael Voris. In these calamitous times in the church, and that's exactly what they are, thanks to the machinations of wicked prelates, there's a wide range of reaction among the laity. Some abandon the mothership and head to schismatic outfits. Some abandon the mothership and head for heretical outfits. Some abandon the mothership by doing nothing, somewhat paralyzed. None of these responses are acceptable. Each is morally rotten, in fact.
So in the middle of all this, the folks in the Society of St. Pius X are the bad guys. They're outside the church. For heaven's sakes, what are we doing here? Half of the folks in the Vatican may well be outside the church, but the sons of Archbishop Lefebvre, the 600 plus priests who are holding the Catholic ground, they're the problem? Our enemies are those who hate Christ, friends. Let's just agree on that much. Our enemies are not fellow Catholics, neo-Catholics, traditional Catholics, even the Sedevacantists. Folks that can say the creed and mean it, folks that believe still in the root. Those aren't our enemies right now, don't you see? We can disagree with them, but they're not the enemies. They're not the enemies of Christ. They don't hate Christ. Our enemies are those who hate Christ. in the world and those who hate tradition in the church. You see? Everyone else must be seen at least as fellow travelers who are doing their best. You know, if not potential allies, we're picking up allies right now all over the world, thanks to our Pope Francis, who's waking a lot of people up. So we have to be patient with each other. And even with ourselves, we have to understand our own deficiencies here. 50 years into this revolution, 100 years into this revolution, in a sense, obviously. Because again, I always say Pius X was warning the world, warning the church about this revolution 100 years ago. It's been a long time coming. It's not just Vatican II. So if you've just found your way back to holy tradition, here's the thing. The crisis in the church today outed itself after the Second Vatican Council, and it came in on the back of the liturgical revolution. So the Mass that you're going to right now is part of that revolution, and this is not going to be easy for anyone. Because I'm not saying the Mass is invalid, I'm not saying anybody who goes there is an evil person or anything else. But they use the liturgy to change you from something from one thing, Catholic, into something else, sort of a hybrid Catholic-Protestant mix. Whether we want to admit it or not, that's what happened. And while there is certainly more to this than the Mass, it's important to realize that it all started there. They went after the Mass first. They changed how Catholics prayed so that they could change eventually how Catholics believe. And you look around and you tell me if they were successful. Look at the empty churches. Look at the churches closing all over the place. Look how belief in things like the real presence gone. You know, high percentages of Catholics no longer believe. High percentages of Catholics using contraception. High percentages of Catholics simply leaving the church. It worked. So using the liturgical revolution, they made Catholics virtually indistinguishable from Protestants over the past half century especially. You know what? So enough with the priest-sex abuse crisis. Of course, that was inevitable. That's at the end of the thing. That's the tail end of the problem. It's bad, don't get me wrong, but it's not the cause. It's an obvious consequence of a much bigger crisis, a crisis of faith. But the fact that we now see this, that the priesthood has become a gay profession, should lead us to ask bigger questions, more important questions. What happened? How did the church that built Western civilization fall to this subterranean, stinking sewer? What happened? You need to ask yourself this. How did this happen? How did they do this? Have I been deceived to the point where I can't even see it anymore? I don't even know what it means to be Catholic. I don't even know what Catholic liturgy is supposed to look like. I don't know the difference between a Catholic Mass and a Protestant liturgy. They all seem pretty good. If that's happening to you, if that's how you look at it, you've been brainwashed. Don't feel bad. This isn't personal. They've tried to do it to us all. We're all affected by this. And now it's time to climb back out, find out what happened, and fix it, at least in ourselves. Because if you're going to survive what's to come, and it's a nightmare that's coming, believe me, I think we all know that. If you're going to survive what's to come, you must understand what's happened already. And you must be able to ask the relevant questions, even of yourself. And people don't like to do that. Well, I've had it right. I saw it from the beginning. I couldn't have gotten this wrong. Everyone got it wrong. Millions of Catholics have left the church because they were deceived. It would be myopic to think there's no way in hell that we could have been deceived to some extent. 60 years ago, there was a Catholic church in nearly every town in America. There were hundreds of thousands of Catholic priests, hundreds of thousands of religious. And what's happened? Catholic priests, they had more vocations than they knew what to do with back in those years. And guess what? The kids were fine. The little kids were not threatened by priests. Not only back in the 1940s and 30s and 20s, but for 1,000 years before. No abuse was going on of little kids at the hands of priests. And yet they'd all taken vows of celibacy, hadn't they? So let's not go there. Well, it's because of celibacy. We got to get these guys married. Please. What an insult to single people everywhere. That the problem with the Catholic Church is the Catholic priests can't get married. And so that their football team loses on a Sunday afternoon, they get a little depressed, they're feeling lonely, they don't have anything in the refrigerator, want to go out and rape some kids. That's absurd. The problem is not celibacy. For 1,000 years, for 2,000 years, priests were celibate, and this wasn't happening. So what happened? What happened to change all this? Something happened, right? Something huge, something specific. The Second Vatican Council happened. The Spirit of Vatican II happened, which represents a rupture from the past. And after that, the liturgical revolution happened. The old Latin Mass was taken out. The old sanctuaries, the old communion rails, the old altars, the old priesthood, the old Catholic Mass. That's key to your understanding of what happened to your church, what happened to your kids, what happened to your neighbors, why nobody's Catholic anymore. Key to understanding that mystery is understanding what they did to the Catholic Mass. Because the one thing that set Catholics apart from every other religion on earth is, of course, the holy sacrifice of the Mass. When's the last time your priest used the word sacrifice, right? They don't even pretend anymore. It's the Lord's meal. It's the meal for the community, or whatever. Not sacrifice. That's medieval. But it was the same everywhere you went 70 years ago, 60 years ago, 50. Everywhere you went in the world, the Catholic Mass was the same. Always in Latin, always exactly the same. Unifying and uniting Christendom against the world, the flesh, and the devil, no matter where you went. They had to break that, and that's exactly what they did. They got rid of the old Latin Mass for a reason, because it was so hated by non-Catholics, so despised by the Protestants for 500 years, reviled by Martin Luther first, and Calvin and Zwingli and all the rest. Why? Why in heaven's name did they need to get rid of the old Latin Mass? Why do they hate it so today? Why can you still get, most bishops will refuse priests permission to say the Mass of Padre Pio, the Mass of St. John Vianney? Why? Why are they so afraid of the Latin Mass? Ask yourself these questions. And by the way, I'm not judging those of you who still attend the new Mass, including many good priest friends of mine who are still in positions where they have to offer the new Mass reverently, at least sometimes, at least part of the time, because they haven't found a way to go all the way over to tradition. I'm not judging people. I'm asking you to look at what they did to the liturgy. Now that Francis has made it so clear where this revolution was heading all along, we need to ask ourselves some hard questions. Why did they change the Mass? Why did they knock out the communion rails? Why did they force communion in the hand to all of us throughout the whole world? Why did they change sacrifice into meal? Why did they change altars into tables, as the Protestants had done 500 years ago? How can we not ask these questions now when we know what's going on in the church? When great missionaries and bishops, such as Archbishop Lefebvre 50 years ago, were insisting, as he put it, that even, quote, even when said with piety and respect for the liturgical rules, the new Mass is impregnated with the spirit of Protestantism. It bears within it a poison harmful to the faith, said Archbishop Lefebvre. So with the faith of Catholics now, the Catholic people now devastated beyond description after just 50 years of this new Mass, how can we possibly pretend that there's no connection between what we're seeing now and what happened back there in 1969 to the liturgy? So when no less a person than Dietrich von Hildebrand, whom Pius XII called the 20th century doctor of the Church, when he said of the new Mass, quote, "Truly, if one of the devils in C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters had been entrusted with the ruin of the liturgy, he could not have done it better than they did it." We must ask ourselves, what are we missing here? We must face the possibility that the pioneer traditional Catholics were right all along, and that the new Mass is the work of those who Pope Pius X described in Pascendi, again, over 100 years ago. He described as vipers who nest themselves in the very bosom of the Church and have indeed proliferated and spawned a far more pestilential new breed there, modernists who have infiltrated the Church at every level. And you wonder why these modernists now are abusing little kids, when for 50, 100 years they oversaw the liturgical abuse of God Himself, when they wrecked the venerable Roman Rite, the Mass of our Fathers. The Mass of the Cristeros, the Mass of the Crusaders, the Mass of the Vendeans. They wrecked it. That's what this is really all about. And our petty little preferences about liturgy and Latin, that has nothing to do with it. What we like, whether it's Latin, incense, or nice chant, that has nothing to do with it. This is not about preferences, nor is it about mere abuses like altar girls and communion in the hand. It's about the change of the Roman Rite for a reason, because they wanted to change us, to make us into something other than Catholic. The destruction of the Catholic Mass was all about that. It was all about a one-world religion. What John Henry Cardinal Newman said in his sermon, The Religion of the World, where he warned us against the modern-day ape of God, the world religion, what he called the counterfeit of the truth. Don't you see? That's what we're living through right now. That's what Francis is overseeing right now. And it has nothing to do with whether or not you prefer Latin or English when you go to Mass. You have to ask yourself, why did they destroy this? What were they trying to replace it with? What were they trying to build? What diabolical edifice were they erecting? Because that's what this is all about. It's not about Ted McCarrick. It's not about Pope Francis. It's about setting the cornerstone of a one-world religion and counterfeit of the truth. We have to face this. That's what traditional Catholics were fighting for 50 years ago. They knew this was coming. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, you know, the big bad guy that they excommunicated because he was a schismatic, that guy, the only one that stood up against these marauders. 40 years ago, he warned the world that this was coming. He writes, quote, "It is inconceivable that all of this can continue without God punishing the world by some terrible chastisement. This is why we must beg God's mercy for ourselves and for all mankind. And we must struggle. We must fight. We must fight fearlessly to maintain tradition, to maintain above all the liturgy of the Holy Mass, because it is the very foundation of the Church. Indeed, of Christian civilization. Were the true Mass no longer to be celebrated in the Church would disappear." End quote. Said Lefebvre 40 years ago. Friends, the Church is disappearing right now. The Attorney General's offices, the State Department coming after the Catholic Church, rightfully so, because of the abuse brought on by this regime of novelty, this new Mass, new liturgy, new priesthood. The Church is disappearing before our eyes. And so it should come as no surprise, since our God is a merciful God, that the modernists failed to kill the one thing that could sustain those who wanted to keep the old faith, the Mass. They failed to kill it. They tried. They did everything they possibly could to destroy it, but for some reason, it came back. It survived. Even one of their own, Pope Benedict, restored the traditional Latin Mass to the Church. Inexplicably, he restored it. And we see the hand of God in that, whatever Benedict was and is. Because today, the Latin Mass of Holy Christendom is coming back for those who seek it out. If you want to know how to survive this, you need to look into this question of the liturgy, because God's merciful and He has restored to a remnant of believers the means to survive the coming New World Order of Antichrist. He has restored the Mass, and it is the Mass. It is the Mass that matters. It is the Mass that has always mattered, because God matters, and through that Mass, through the Mass of our fathers, God will be with us even in a diabolical New World Order that now seems to be imminent. He will be with us always, on the condition that we stay with Him by going back to Him, by going back to the old faith, back to the old traditions, back to the old Mass, back to the faith of our fathers. Friends, there is no other way. I'm Michael Matt for the Remnant Underground, and we'll see you next time.